People have said that it's convenient that that's all you remember. What would you say to that? And here is essentially the fatal blow that indicates without a shadow of a doubt that she does remember the whole morning. So right off the bat, you already know because she's already told us that she remembers waking up at the house, making the decision with Dom and Davion to go back to Dom's house. And she remembers turning the corner onto the fatal street. So you already know that the whole morning is not nothing. Now, we've seen from her a consistent pattern since the very beginning of her Q&A with Netflix, where she inserts the word just unnecessarily as a placeholder for something in her mind that she's defending against. The only reason that people do this, use just in this manner, is if in their brain, as they're telling you whatever they're saying, they have an image of what really happened. But they want to direct you in a different direction. They want to point you somewhere else. Like, for example, to nothing. She wants us to believe that it's just nothing. But she can't even say that directly. She throws in a like. It's like nothing, which means the only thing that we know with absolute certainty is that what she remembers isn't nothing. If I say it's like an orange or like an apple, what am I saying? I'm saying, well, it's not an apple and it's not an orange, but it's similar. And we have to keep in mind when we're doing statement analysis, the way that people lie to our face and get away with it is by making an inference, asking us to infer from what they're saying, but not saying it outright. So here, by saying just like nothing, she's implying that she doesn't remember, but she doesn't say that. She doesn't say that. She wants us to infer from like nothing that that's what she means. But if she doesn't say it, we do not believe it. That is so important. Like nothing, you know what? That means nothing. Means nothing. And it means even more than nothing here because we know it's deceptive. So she's intentionally misleading us, misrepresenting reality. So what she's telling you, it's not nothing, guys. And she couldn't be more clear here. There are at least 3 indicators here of deception. This is outright deception. This is proof, in my mind, to me, that she absolutely does remember the accident.
The intention of justice is to see that the guilty people are proven guilty and that the innocent are freed. Only we have a problem here.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the I Don't Belong Here show, and I am your host, Samantha Beningo. And of course, I am a behavioral scientist, a career psychotherapist, a 6th-year PhD candidate in clinical psychology, a master's level psychologist and counselor. And today we are completing my analysis of Mackenzie Shirilla using statement analysis. Now, to be clear, statement analysis is a little different from what I might normally do professionally. Basically, I am applying a series of rules to what somebody is saying. They aren't my rules. They are the rules, if you will. Now, there are a lot of them, and it takes a long time not only to learn all of them, but to be able to learn how they change and are different in different contexts. And so, because of that, it's a lot to learn and not an easy skill to develop. And one thing I will say, we don't get to do any kind of baseline analysis of Mackenzie because we don't have any statements other than the most sensitive. She jumps right in to answering the $1 million questions immediately. So there's no time or examples of what it looks like when Mackenzie is answering the softball questions that we might get, for example, in a trial from witnesses. So that's a downside. And I will admit that on the front end. But I think we still do get quite a bit of information from Mackenzie, and I stand by what you are about to see. So, without further ado, here is my analysis of the statements of Mackenzie Shirilla. So, the producer asks Mackenzie, so could you tell me why you want to give this interview, Mackenzie?
I've never spoke before, and I never told my side of the story, and I understand there's many different sides to the story and different perspectives, but I just want to say my truth, and I just know myself, and I know I'm not a monster.
Right off the bat, we have I've never. So never is a very big indication of deception. And we have two back to back. So these two statements right away are deception. There's deception here. I think it may be obvious, though, because first of all, the sentiment that she's trying to convey is that she's not told her story, right? I've never spoken what she calls my truth before publicly, but there was a trial and it was quite clear what her defense was. I don't remember. While we maybe haven't heard from her mouth directly in a sit down interview what her story was, it's not true to say that she's never spoken before because she's been very clear what her story is, right? But when she says, I've never spoken before, there's something she's not telling us. This is a missing time or a missing action word before. So we don't know what the before is a reference to, but she is holding something in her mind that we are not privy to. So I've never spoken before. Okay. And then she says, I never told my side of the story. So I'm wondering if maybe there's an appeal or emotion coming. In other words, she's telling us something. She's speaking out as part of a larger effort, perhaps to sway the public narrative. And this is part of that effort. So something else is coming. And because she put in this word before, we know that this meeting with the Netflix producer is part of that strategy. That's my guess. Then she says, I never told my side of the story. So this is interesting. I think what she means here is I've never sat down in a matter-of-fact way, like I am here with you, and told directly my version of events, which is what I just said, right? So she's reiterating that. However, the big and most important bit of information that we get here is that she is aware and admitting that there is the story. There is the truth. So when she says the story, that's a reference to what happened that night, factually. But that's not what she's going to tell us. What she's going to tell us is my side of the story, the sequence of events that occurred on that night. And I understand that there's many different sides. I think what she's saying here is she doesn't want to fight or be combative with the families or with people who are on the other side, right? Or a different side. She's careful not to say other side. She's trying to leave room for many different perspectives, which is clever. However, she's also very clear that there is the story, and then there's my side. And I'm here to tell my side. But she doesn't want to come across as inconsiderate or as dismissive to the families. So she does not want to come across as entitled, as like a bratty teenager that is tone deaf. So that's really what this is about, above and beyond. She has a very acute, a very clear awareness of public sentiment about her, and why she's sitting down is to try to sway public opinion so that people do not see her as a monster. That is what this is all about. That's why this is the opening statement to what she's about to tell us. This is why she is here. She is here to try to shift the public sentiment about her so that we don't see her as a monster. The problem, though, is that it's quite clear when she continually reiterates, this is my truth, this is my side, that this is not the truth. It's not what happened on that morning. Right? So the purpose of her meeting with Netflix and agreeing to give an interview is to try to change the public sentiment about her. But to do that, she can't tell the truth, because the truth would be indicting, right? Would be more evidence of her being the monster. But I just want to say my truth. Like, I'm not here to tell the truth. I'm just here to tell you my truth. Actually, I'm not here to tell the story. I want to say my truth. Right? I want to say my truth. And I just know myself, and I know I'm not a monster. So she's giving us her reasoning for why she's sitting down. She's sitting down to try to shift the public narrative about who she is, to shift how people perceive her. She wants people to see her as empathetic to the families, as remorseful, as caring about Dom and Davion's lives, and not as a monster. That's what this is all about. However, she's being deceptive, because while that's the purpose of this, she's not going to tell us the story. And the way that this reads, it's quite clear. She knows what the story is. And she's clearly going to give us my truth, my side. So that's a clear indication that what she's about to tell us is not the story. It's not the truth. She says, and I understand that there's many different sides to the story. The that in there indicates clearly she wants no part of the different sides, meaning the story that the families are telling, but she also wants no part of the real story. Like, she wants to distance herself from what really happened on that night. And we can infer based on that that this part about I'm not a monster, what that really tells us is if she believes, and this makes sense because she's still a young kid. I mean, even now, she's 20 years old. Is she 20 years old? She's a child. The way that she has set this up in her head, if the story that the prosecution told is true, then she's a monster. So she can't admit that the story is true. And what she is saying is sort of backwards logic. Well, I'm not a monster, so that story can't be true, right? However, she knows that it is, and therefore this is all deception.
Did you ever feel in your arguments with Dom rage that you couldn't control?
No, it was never like that. It was always just like more, when we'd argue, I would get sad because he didn't really have good communication skills, and we would be cool later that day or a couple hours later, and we would be watching movies on the couch, eating popcorn.
One thing I will say here, when you watch this clip at home on Netflix, pay close attention to her face as she's going through this very specific part of her statement. Note that she gets notably angry as she's talking about Dom not having good communication skills. And then note that at the very end of that statement, she intentionally goes back into like the sad victim face. It's so palpable a shift that it really does feel calculated. Pay attention. You use your judgment though. Don't take my word for it. You tell me what you think. So immediately she gets defensive here. So she's vehemently shaking her head no, and she says, no, it was never like that, which means, yes, that's exactly how it was, without a doubt. So this is deception. She absolutely knows that she did feel rage that she couldn't control. And she says, no, it was never like that, meaning when she says that, not only was it like that, but she wants no part of it. She wants to get those rage episodes, as far away from her as quickly as possible. Also note, she doesn't say, I didn't experience rage episodes. That is not what she says. In fact, she goes on to take no responsibility for her behavior whatsoever, and actually blames Dom for her rage episodes by naming that how she was feeling was because of Dom's poor communication skills. Apparently, nobody's taught her about codependency yet. It was always just like. So always is in the same camp as never. These are extremes. And people that are being deceptive use this to try to convince us. So she's trying to convince us that she never felt rage, that instead it was always just or only kind of like. Remember, when we see a like, all that means is that whatever she's about to tell us it is like, that's not really what it was. Because when we say that something is like something, it means it's not the thing that we are referencing. It's something else. It's also a way that people that are lying or being deceptive try to make themselves feel better about being deceptive, which is what she's doing here. But then she stops herself because she doesn't really know where to go from there. So then she says, more, so this is pretty smooth, actually. She says, more, I was And then she pauses only for such a brief second that you don't really see. What she says next is not a continuation of the sentence. So it looks like it flows. More, I was, and then she stops. When we'd argue, I'd get sad because he didn't really have good communication skills. So, but in actuality, she does stop herself from this train of thought and jumps to a different train of thought. And again, this is very clear evidence of self-monitoring, being very focused and sensitive to how what she's saying is going to be perceived. She's trying to say the right thing. And if there's a right thing, then that means she's not here to tell us the truth. She's here to try to tell us what she thinks we want her to say, to manipulate us to get what she wants from us. Something I'm sure Mackenzie is quite used to doing. This is most likely part of that larger strategy that I mentioned earlier to try to paint Dom as the problem in their relationship. That it was really, she was just reacting to how he was. When we'd argue, I'd get sad because he didn't really have good communication skills. And we would be cool later that day or a couple of hours later, and we would be watching movies on the couch, eating popcorn. And as she is saying this first part of this statement, she is seething. I mean, her eyes, she looks furious as she's trying to think of how to address this question. So she's not happy that she was asked it. And you can see what she did here. She immediately blamed him because she was raging out of control. It was always, so think about that. Her first instinct as the answer to this question was to overgeneralize that every time she got upset in the relationship, it was because Dom didn't know how to communicate. That was what she was trying to communicate initially, right? And we know that because she has always and just in there again, which means she's got an idea in her head of what she doesn't want us to see or hear, and then a picture of what she wants us to see or how she wants to paint the picture. And that is what the target is, painting this picture here. That I would get sad because when we argue, he didn't really have good communication skills. She stops after always just like and says, well, more. So she walks back that absolutist language. It was always just like, pause, more, I was, pause. When we'd argue, I'd get sad because he didn't really have good communication skills. But the truth is, she can't even say that with a straight face because she says he didn't really have good communication skills. I also have to say, this statement makes me wonder if when she does think about Dom, which by the sounds of it is not very much, given what's come out about her behavior in prison, she goes on the sugar daddy prison websites where strangers give you money, strange men give you money. She's had multiple girlfriends while she's been in prison, of course, still trying to work it, get all the attention, be cool, be well-liked, be popular. Of course, I mean, there'd be no doubt she's going to do exactly the same thing in prison that she was doing out of prison, right? Of course. But it seems to me like the way she says this, she's blaming him for what happened. Like, if he just had better communication skills, then maybe I wouldn't have been so angry and we wouldn't have been in this accident. That deep down, she blames him for being in this situation. Now, we also have an explanatory statement here followed by a negative. So we have, it was always just like more I was. When we'd argue, I'd get sad because, okay, so underline because he didn't really have good communication skills. So this is outright deception. You put a big cross through it, this entire beginning of this paragraph. And then she goes on to say, and moreover, right, on top of that, we would be cool later. Later that day or a couple of hours later, you'll see she's got later repeated there. And we would be watching movies on the couch, eating popcorn. So who cares whether we were arguing or not? That didn't even matter because later on, even in the same day, we would be fine again, right? So she's trying to minimize whatever those interactions were anyway. In other words, what she's saying is those didn't even matter anyway because we were fine just a few minutes later. She's trying to paint a different reality, but it's clear that it's deception. This is not what was going on. And hopefully it's clear that the whole purpose of this is to try to say my rage episodes weren't relevant to the accident because we would have been fine 10 minutes later eating popcorn.
Davion, he was more of Dom's friend. That summer, he came to live with me and Dom for a week or two. And during those couple weeks, I was growing really close to Davion. He was just full of life. He was a good person.
Davion, he was more of Dom's friend. So this is interesting. He was more of Dom's friend, which means actually he was my friend, right? Because she's not saying that he wasn't my friend. She's saying he was more Dom's friend than he was my friend. But he was her friend too. So this is distancing. She's actually efforting to put distance between her and Davion. Now, I wonder if that's not because she's trying to offer an explanation for why she may have come across as more callous or less remorseful about Davion. But she misses the point because that is why Davion's family felt like he was cargo. That's why the prosecutor referred to him that way, because it was clear that she didn't give a shit about him, right? The fact that she would do this with him in the car, right, underscores that very point. And here she's in a way reiterating it, maybe without realizing it, because she's echoing the same sentiment. We weren't really friends. So I wound up sitting with this for a little longer. And it turns out I think these very brief statements about Davion actually means something different than they seem. Let's take a closer look. That summer. So right away, we have a distancing word. She does not want to think about that summer. She wants distance from it. He, Davion, came to live with me and Dom. So notice, me and Dom are separated. It's not us, it's me and Dom. But with is a connecting word that is often used when there's a conflict. My guess is Mackenzie didn't want Davion living at the house because she wanted to live there with Dom. She had just graduated from high school. She probably thought, okay, this is going to be our house now. I'm going to move in. We're going to live happily ever after. This is going to be my home now. Maybe the reason why Davion had only lived there for a short period of time was because she winds up killing them both in a car accident. Not because he was only temporarily staying there the way she's sort of making it sound here. That summer, he came to live with me and Dom for a week or two. And during those couple of weeks, that's funny. So she's trying to make it sound like it was less time than it was. She says that summer he came to live with me and Dom for a week or two, but then goes on to reference the couple of weeks, meaning it wasn't a week or two. It was probably at least 2, maybe more weeks, right? And during those couple of weeks, I was growing really close to Davion. We cannot dismiss this. Mackenzie is very aware of how the public experiences her. That's why she's making this statement. She knows that multiple times throughout the trial, Davion was portrayed as cargo. That was a big theme. Her mom addresses it during sentencing. So it does not make sense for Mackenzie to be distancing herself from Dom during this statement. It means that something else during this part of this interview is driving why she's saying it this way. Because she knows better. She knows that this isn't good for her. It sounds terrible. It sounds exactly like the prosecution was portraying her relationship with Davion. Cold, distant, like she didn't give a shit about him. So something else is going on here. She is distancing and minimizing this relationship for a different reason. This isn't about appearance. So something is wrong here because she's saying I was growing really close, which implies that they were close, but that she was in the process of growing really close to Davion. So now twice we have instances of her trying to make it sound like they weren't really friends. But in doing so, she is essentially verifying that they were friends. Let's think about how you would say this if you were growing close to somebody. The way you would say this is, we were growing close. We were getting closer. The we indicates that closeness. So she actually is distancing herself while telling us, or wanting to tell us, that they were growing closer. This is very shady. Also, look at how far away she is from Davion in this sentence, in the sentence itself. She's saying that she was growing close to him, but then she placed them as far as she could get them apart from each other in the sentence. So something is very off here. There was some tension between her and Davion and Dom. Maybe she didn't want Davion living there. Maybe she didn't like the fact that Davion and Dom were becoming closer. She felt like a third wheel. Maybe she became worried that the relationship with Davion was going to somehow, reflect negatively on the relationship between her and Dom. Something is off, and she's hiding something about Davion. And remember, Rosie's boyfriend, Bubba, in the documentary tells us that Davion was supposed to stay there. and actually help him with his truck the next day. And then at the last minute, he decided to go back to the house because he wanted to shower and maybe grab something to eat or whatever. So maybe part of why she was pissed off that morning was because she wasn't going to get to be alone with Dom the way she had hoped or wanted to be. So maybe that's what was the spark that ultimately turned into whatever nutty headspace she got into that morning that ultimately led to both of them getting killed. Because it does strike me that she would decide to murder Dom with Davion in the car also. Because I don't think she's a sociopath. It's possible that that is exactly what happened. That actually what happened was she was pissed at Davion as well as Dom. That she was in some kind of a rage out because when she found out that Davion was coming home with them, maybe they were walking out chummy, laughing, walking ahead of her. For whatever reason, at that very moment, whatever plan she had in her head as like the backup plan, if things don't work out with Dom, I'll just kill us both. He became a target of that anger. Because this was targeted. And he was in that car too. The language is clear here. Something is very off. And she was angry at Davion.
What do you remember from the morning of July the 31st?
It was like 5 in the morning, and we decided to head back to Dom's house. And I remember turning on the street, and then I'm waking up in the hospital the next day, and my whole life is shattered. The whole morning is just like nothing, and it sounds crazy, but I'm not gonna like lie just because people want to hear a story. I have no recollection of that morning. I'm not saying I'm innocent. I was a driver of a tragedy, but I'm not a murderer.
What do you remember from the morning of July 31st? She says, it was like 5 in the morning and we decided to head back to Dom's house. Okay, so we know it was a little after 5 in the morning. So when she says it was like 5, that's confirmation that when she uses the word like, it essentially means it's not what I just said. It's not 5 a.m. It's like 5 a.m. So that's verification for us. But now we have another problem. She says, we decided to head back to Dom's house. So she doesn't say we decided to go home or we decided to go back to Dom's. She says to head back to Dom's. Now that's different. To head back means to go in the direction of. That tells us that at the moment where they made the decision to go back to Dom's house, there's a we in there. So she felt like they were a we. She felt some degree of closeness to Dom and Davion. But there was also an awareness that they were heading back, which means like there was a stop planned. So we need to find out, was Davion still staying at Dom's house at the time of this crash? Because maybe what she's saying here is she was planning on dropping Davion home on the way back to Dom's house. because everything else she'd said to this point made me think that Davion was staying at Dom's house at this time, but maybe he wasn't. So that's something that we need to get clarity on. And it's an important detail because if she's planning on taking Davion home before they get back to Dom's, then this language makes sense. If not, then it's possible she's already planning to make that stop where they wound up before they left the house. And that's something we would need to know more to suss out. She also doesn't say we were going home or we were on our way home. She is very clear that this is Dom's house. So at this time, that's not her house. That's not her home. That's Dom's house. That's not even our house, which gives you a pretty clear indication of how she felt about that house. That was very clearly Dom's house. And that's a big indicator, right? That indicates that this idea that they would have probably been married by now, probably not true. She wasn't feeling close enough to him to be comfortable referencing the house as home. Now, when we see I remember, we immediately take notice because obviously when somebody is recalling a sequence of events, and that's the whole point of the conversation, that was the point of the question, the underlying assumption is that you remember what you're saying. So when we see I remember, we put a flag in that. It is an indicator of deception. People that are speaking honestly about what they remember don't use the word I remember. Now, there is something here that's a little disturbing. She says, I remember turning on the street. Now, when people recall a sequence of events, they're doing so from that moment. Like they're putting themselves back in that moment when it was happening. And then they are referencing it as they're speaking to us. So when she says the street here, that street already had significance. It wasn't the street yet at that point because there was no accident. The accident came after the part that she's saying she doesn't remember. So why is it the street? What significance did this street have prior to this accident in her mind? It had some significance because she just referenced it as the street. I'm not trying to make stuff up here. I mean, this is what the language says. So for those of you that maybe thought she had scoped out this area before, this would certainly lend some credence to that argument. I remember turning on the street, and then I'm waking up in the hospital the next day, and I don't. Now, this is odd because if you were waking up in the hospital the next day and you don't remember what happened, then you don't know how much time has gone by. You don't know if it's the next day. You don't know if it's 2 weeks later. You don't remember what happened. So when she says, I'm waking up in the hospital the next day, that is a little bizarre. That's the way I'll say it. It's bizarre. That's not what you would expect to see from somebody who has no memory of what happened. You would maybe see the next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital. But the next day wouldn't be there if you didn't remember, because you wouldn't know when you wake up what day it is. It's like if you've ever taken a nap during the day. This used to happen to me in college because, I never slept. So I would wake up and it'd be like daylight out and I wouldn't know, is it the same day? Is it the next day? Is it morning? Do I have to get up and go to class? Did I sleep through the whole night? I had no idea what day or time it was. I can only imagine if I truly had no memory and woke up in a hospital, what the hell that would feel like. The fact that she says the next day, it's a flag. It means that she knew when she woke up why she was there. And the only way you could know that is if you knew there was an accident. And then we have a very distinct change in language from, I remember turning on the street and then I'm waking up. We have a change in tense before the accident and after the accident. And that change in verb tense is indicative of deception. So we know that she is skipping over what else she remembers, which tells us very clearly, this is a very clear indication, guys, that she remembers what happened. Okay? I remember turning on the street and then I'm waking up in the hospital the next day. So I'm waking up in the hospital the next day and I don't, and then she stops herself. Keep in mind, she doesn't say, I don't remember. She stops and says, then my whole life is shattered. She throws this statement in at this very moment during this interview with Netflix. My life is shattered because she gets stuck here. She tries to say, I don't remember, but she can't. So she changes the subject and then puts on the victim face so that it ends the conversation. I don't. Then my life is shattered, effectively shutting down this whole line of questioning so she doesn't have to say, I don't remember. Then my whole life is shattered. Well, you shattered your whole life. You were the one driving the car. It was going at 100 miles per hour. And she, of course, does know what happened that morning, without a doubt. It's clear as day, guys. She knows what happened that morning. Everything that she wants this statement to disprove, wanting to seem empathic, thoughtful, like she cares about the families, like she's not aggressive, like she doesn't have an anger problem, like it was really Dom that was the aggressor. She's responsible and caring and loving. This statement, with her behavior, is evidencing the exact opposite. And now we're going to get more confirmation of that. So she says, people have said that it's convenient that that's all you remember. What would you say to that? And here is essentially the fatal blow that indicates without a shadow of a doubt that she does remember. The whole morning is just like nothing. The whole morning. So right off the bat, you already know because she's already told us that she remembers waking up at the house, making the decision with Dom and Davion to go back to Dom's house. And she remembers turning the corner onto the fatal street. So you already know that the whole morning is not nothing. Then, now we've seen from her a consistent pattern since the very beginning of her Q&A with Netflix, where she inserts the word just unnecessarily as a placeholder for something in her mind that she's defending against. The only reason that people do this, use just in this manner, is if in their brain, as they're telling you whatever they're saying, they have an image of what really happened, but they want to direct you in a different direction. They want to point you somewhere else. Like, for example, to nothing. She wants us to believe that it's just nothing. But she can't even say that directly. She throws in a like. It's like nothing, which means the only thing that we know with absolute certainty is that what she remembers isn't nothing. If I say it's like an orange or like an apple, what am I saying? I'm saying, well, it's not an apple and it's not an orange, but it's similar. And we have to keep in mind when we're doing statement analysis, the way that people lie to our face and get away with it is by inferring something, but not saying it outright. So here, by saying just like nothing, she's implying that she doesn't remember, but she doesn't say that. She doesn't say that. She wants us to infer from like nothing that that's what she means. But if she doesn't say it, we do not believe it. That is so important. Like nothing, you know what? That means nothing. Means nothing. And it means even more than nothing here because we know it's deceptive. So she's intentionally misleading us, misrepresenting reality. So what she's telling you, it's not nothing, guys. And she couldn't be more clear here. There are at least 3 indicators here of deception. This is outright deception. This is proof, in my mind, to me, that she absolutely does remember the accident.
The whole morning is just like nothing, and it sounds crazy, but I'm not gonna like lie just because people want to hear a story. I have no recollection of that morning.
So then, as she continues, you can see she stops and then she starts. She stops herself and then she starts again. Now, these are indications that she's hypersensitive to the words coming out of her mouth. She's self-censoring. She's wanting to get it, quote, right, which is by itself an indication of deception. Because if somebody is self-censoring or so hypersensitive to every word coming out the right way, then you know there's an ulterior motive, right? They're not telling you the truth. They want what they're saying to appear a certain way. The whole morning is just like nothing. And then she stops herself. And then she says, it sounds crazy, but and then she stops herself. Like I can't, then she stops herself. I'm not gonna lie just because people want to hear a story. Now, immediately in this first attempt at a sentence, we see 3 I's. And I pause. It sounds crazy, but I pause. Like I can't pause. So this is deception. Period, full stop. Whatever she's about to tell us, we can say confidently, this is deception. And it sounds crazy, but so she wants to acknowledge that it's not believable, but also there's no way to reassure us that what she's saying is true because it's a trap. Anywhere that she goes here with what she says opens the door for her to fall into a deception hole. And the fact that she is trying to acknowledge that it might sound crazy is also an indicator of deception. Because to people who really have memory loss, it doesn't sound crazy at all. In fact, it sounds pretty normal and par for the course, though not exactly the way Mackenzie's memory works. Because Mackenzie is very clear. She remembers turning onto the street and everything before that. Then she remembers waking up in the hospital and everything after that. The only thing that she does not remember, according to her, is what happened between turning onto that street and the crash, which is conveniently the time where she would have stepped on that gas at 100%. That's the only thing she doesn't remember. And that simply is not believable. And she's aware of that, which is why it sounds crazy. It's also why she can't figure out how to say this, because when she tries to say, I don't remember, it won't come out. This is evidence of how difficult it is to lie. We will do just about anything to avoid lying outright. Now, imagine this. You have been in a horrible car accident or accident of any kind that was lethal, that killed two of your loved ones. It would be the most normal thing in the world not to remember. In fact, it happens all the time. It's very common for people not to remember these types of serious events, extreme events like this. So actually, it wouldn't sound crazy at all not to remember. Not remembering would be standard operating procedure. But if you really couldn't remember, what would you be saying? You'd be saying, I can't remember, and God damn it, I wish I could. I wish I could. I wish I could tell everybody what the hell happened here. But that doesn't occur to Mackenzie because it's not true. It's probably never occurred to her to think that or say that out loud. And for anyone that I have ever known, clients, friends, family, who've experienced memory loss of any kind, I promise they don't think it sounds crazy. They feel crazy, but they're not worried about how it sounds to me. They're more focused on not being able to remember something they feel they should be able to remember. And it's really scary when you don't remember something that you feel like you should remember. And it sounds crazy, but I can't, I'm not gonna lie just because people want to hear a story. So you have to note all these pauses. These are like stop signs in her mind. She doesn't know where to go from those points. What she is trying to say is really simple. I don't remember, and there's nothing I can do about it. That's what she's trying to say. But anytime that she tries to say, I don't remember, it doesn't come out. She can't say it. And she outs it right here. It sounds crazy, but she wants to say, but I can't remember. But she doesn't. She stops herself and then she says, I can't. She has to reduce the commitment and say, well, it's like I can't. And like I can't doesn't mean I don't remember. Like I can't means I can't remember is more indicative of I want to tell you, but there's somebody preventing me from telling you. Or I want to speak the truth, but if I do, there will be some very serious consequence and therefore I can't. So it's not that I don't have the information, it's that I am prohibited from giving it to you. That's what can't means, typically. But this doesn't say that either. It says like I can't. So there is nothing prohibiting her. She's just not going to. And then she says, I'm not gonna lie just because people want to hear a story. I know what she's implying on its face, but from a deception detection perspective, this statement is essentially gibberish. It appears like her intention was to communicate, I don't remember. But she couldn't say it. And so instead, this mess of meaninglessness comes out. And that is what this is. It's a mess. And then she says, I have no recollection of that morning. Well, recollection is one of the more common ways that people try to say they don't remember when it's deceptive, because they're not actually saying they don't remember. She doesn't even say, I don't recall. She says, I have no recollection of that morning. I'm not even sure Mackenzie Shirilla knows what that word means.
I'm not saying I'm innocent. I was a driver of a tragedy.
I'm not saying I'm innocent, which I love. I'm sure everybody can see this for what it is. She's talking about not remembering, but can't actually get those words out. She's telling us that she knows it sounds crazy, or actually that she thinks it sounds crazy, because it is crazy given that she remembers everything else, except for that very convenient 20 seconds. But she then tries to make it all okay, to make herself feel better about the deception by saying, I'm not saying I'm innocent. So this is really just thrown in there to make herself feel better about the fact that she's being deceptive around what she remembers or doesn't. The problem with this statement is what she then says next, which ultimately invalidates the I'm not saying I'm innocent. That's exactly what she's saying, in fact. I was a driver of a tragedy. That's what she says. I was she does not say I was the driver of this tragedy. She takes herself as far away from this specific event as she possibly could by saying I was a driver of a tragedy. Not even the driver of this tragedy, but just a driver of a tragedy, which means she's taking all of the blame and responsibility of what has happened here off of herself, which is just amazing. Amazing. And then she says, but I'm not a murderer. And now we get the real, true point of this interview. At the very end, the producer asks her an open-ended question. Is there anything else that you want the world to know? And she looks at her lawyer and says, basically something to the effect of like, was that good? I don't want to seem crazy. I don't want to force anything. And then she says,
I just want to make sure that I'm big on the no intent. There was no intent whatsoever. I have excessive amounts of remorse for Dominic, Davion, both of their families. This was not intentional, and I will do everything I can to prove that.
The bottom line is this is all for show. Everything that she's saying here is to try to sway public sentiment in her favor, to try to essentially garner support, to gather us together to want to rally behind her. And while that might work for some people who want to believe her, who are maybe more inclined to want to believe her to begin with, the bottom line here is she is not telling us the truth. She absolutely does remember what happened on that morning. Based on the language here, I think whatever happened had something to do with Mackenzie's feelings around Davion. Something to do with feeling like Dom was pulling away and Davion was somehow facilitating that, not on purpose. Something to that effect, whether it was specifically on that morning or in general, and then also on that morning, I don't know. But this relationship between Dom and Davion seems to have been the facilitator of whatever happened here. There's even evidence that this was something she did premeditate. Now, I don't think she knew that morning she was going to kill these two ahead of time. But she knew when she turned on that street that was the street. And that tells us that it was in her head before she did it. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but when you look closely at this car, at the crash, sure looks like it's the right side of the car that took the brunt of the hit. Doesn't it?
It is the defense counselor's duty to protect the rights of the individual, as it is the prosecution's duty to uphold and defend the laws of the state. Justice for all. Only we have a problem here.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in their cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep. I love everything. Fire spreading all around my room. My world's so bright, it's hard to breathe, but that's alright.
This is me reminding you to like this video. Like the video. I promise if you get up right now and you like this video, I will never sing again. Comment, subscribe.
The intention of